When religion eats itself. Welcome to Bible Study Hub. I'm Ann Wiggins. We are continuing our trek for our devotional every Monday through Friday in the Gospel of John. We've been in chapter 11 for a while. And if I said yesterday, I think I might have that we were wrapping up chapter 11. I was mistaken. We're not wrapping up chapter 11 yet. We won't do that until Friday when we start chapter 12. Hopefully you can hang in with me for that. But anyway, let's get right into our passage. I'll be reading from the Legacy Standard Bible as always. John 11, 47 to 53 is where we will be today. And this is right after Jesus has raised Lazarus from the dead. Massive celebration, and a few people got their feathers ruffled and went straight to the religious leaders to tattle on Jesus. So today we're going to find out what the reaction is from the religious body in Israel to this miracle and everything that Jesus is doing. John 11, 47 to 53. Therefore, the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered the Sanhedrin together and were saying, "What are we doing? For this man is doing many signs or miracles. If we let him go on like this, all will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation." But one of them, Caiaphas, who was high priest that year, said to them, "You know nothing at all, nor do you take into account that it is better for you that one man should die for the people and that the whole nation not perish." Now, he did not say this from himself, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus was going to die for the nation, and not for the nation only, but in order that he might also gather into one the children of God who are scattered abroad, you and me. So from that day on, they planned together to kill him. Well, today we're just going to take a little chunk of that, which is John 11, 47 to 50, and we're going to talk about it. Now, if you're not familiar with these terms, I know it can get a little heavy. Who is the Sanhedrin? Who is Caiaphas? What's going on here? So let me just tell you, in case you don't know, a little bit about how the priesthood worked here in the Old Testament at this time, New Testament at this time. But back in the Old Testament is what I was going to say. Moses was given directions by God on the tribe of Levi, and that would be the priestly tribe. They didn't get pockets of land given to them. They were given cities in various places, but their sole purpose was to serve as priests for the living God. In that pool of priests, there would be one man who would be appointed high priest, and that was a life appointment. You might have noticed that it says twice in the passage that we just read that Caiaphas was high priest that year. That is John being a little snarky. What had happened is that Rome came in, and as I've said before, they gave quite a bit of leeway for the territories that they conquered. They didn't force them necessarily to adhere to the Roman religion with the many gods. They let the Jews loosely operate under their own laws. They weren't allowed to do everything, but they could have their own religious system and all of that. However, if the high priest did something Rome didn't care for, they would switch it out and put in a new high priest. Well, the Sadducees were the high priestly gang, the mob, if you will. Perhaps a mafia would be a good way to describe them. And they tried to keep it all in the family because they were incredibly wealthy. They got their money from highway robbery in the temple where people would come to offer sacrifices, and the the Sadducees would have people set up to reject what they brought and say it wasn't adequate or good. And then they would conveniently have another animal to sell to them at exorbitant fees. And if you didn't have the temple money, and they probably didn't if they were coming from a distance, well, then they would have to do a money exchange. And guess what the exchange rate was? I don't know either, but it was bad, whatever it was. So they were just robbing people left and right in that and in many other ways. So they wanted to keep all this money in the family. So if one was deposed by Rome, they would just take another family member and insert them into it as well. So Annas is mentioned. Caiaphas, I think Annas was Caiaphas's son-in-law, but Caiaphas kind of like the mob boss. He's kind of overseeing the whole operation, and the others are just kind of puppets under his control. So that is what is going on with that. So sometimes Annas is referred to as a high priest, sometimes Caiaphas. They were just kind of all in it together. That's what that is. Now, if you're not familiar with the Sanhedrin, also very interesting, that was kind of like the Supreme Court in Jerusalem. There were smaller Sanhedrin bodies of 23 members in various locations to kind of take care of smaller things. But the big Supreme Court, 71 members stationed in Jerusalem, that was the Sanhedrin. So here's what's really interesting, and this is why I titled this When Religion Eats Itself. What they're terribly concerned about is that something will happen because of what Jesus is doing, that Rome won't like it. At least this is the guise that they're operating under. I think they were actually just didn't like Jesus telling them they were sinners, but this is what they put forth, whether they meant it or not, that Rome would come in and the armies would annihilate them and they would lose their power, they would lose their nation, everything would be gone. And so in order to, in their minds, keep this from happening, they needed to get rid of Jesus. They needed to take him out. What is so sad and so fascinating about this is that because they did that, the judgment of God fell on them. God is gracious. He gave them almost 40 more years after the death of Christ before the judgment really hit hard. But in 70 AD, if you know your biblical history, Rome did come in and took them out. They lost their place and they lost their nation. In fact, after 70 AD, when they are just wiped out, the temple completely torn to shreds, nothing left. There are no more Pharisees. There are no more Sadducees. So the very thing that they decided to take into their own hands and fight against God to accomplish, it was those deeds that ended up coming back to bite them. And the very thing they didn't want to have happen is what happened. You see, when we step outside of God's will, often the very thing we fear is the thing that we fuel unintentionally. God is trustworthy. He is good. His plan is secure. And there is no reason to ever say, I don't trust him and I need to circumvent him because I think I can do it better or I think I know more. Don't do that. Even when it doesn't exactly make sense to us, stay in the will and the plan of God. Don't be like these religious leaders. Stick with God. Even when you go through the fiery trials and the hard times, he will never, I promise, he will never, ever leave you or forsake you. He will never let you down. Always better to be on his side. Well, that's it for today. Thank you so much for joining me. Tomorrow we'll return 6 a.m. Eastern Time, both Facebook and YouTube on Bible Study Hub, and we'll keep going in this wonderful story in the Gospel of John. I will see you then.